order. Looking for a motion to adopt the agenda. Councillor Nixon, Councillor Orlando, all those in favor, motion is carried. And I need a motion to adopt the minutes of the regular council meeting of September 25th. Is Councillor Sauls and Councillor Orlando, all those in favor, motion's carried. Is there any business arising from those regular minutes of September 25th? We are, just before we go into this zoning amendment bylaw for cannabis regulation public hearing, I'd like to ask Mr. Sturgeon, you have a presentation for us?
Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just go through briefly what I went through when council granted first and second, but I've taken out a couple of slides just so that the audience here has a chance to get a sense of what's happened up till now, and if council has any questions. So again, our intent with this was develop our own local regulations for cannabis legalization, which is forthcoming on October 17th, and to replace our current prohibition bylaw and to reflect as best we could the needs and interests of the community here. So where we are right now is the 9th, I think. We went to the Economic Development Commission and the APC Commission prior to this. The APC Commission supported the same bylaws that council had considered, and the EDC offered no comment. So today we're here with our public hearing, and moving ahead, we have some formalities to do with Administrative Transportation, any last minute changes. A special council meeting can be scheduled according to the events of today, and that can be where final adoption happens. And that would not be the 11th, that would be probably 16th. Last time I went through the various levels of government's role. I'm just going to skip the province and the feds for now and just emphasize our role in this, is that we have the ability to adopt local zoning regulations which regulate land use largely, so that's where and how and when, and of course that includes setbacks and heights, but we're not looking at that with these bylaw amendments. We also have amendments to our clean air bylaw, which council granted third reading, and also to our fees and charges bylaw, which was also granted third reading. Just a quick summary of the engagement we did leading up till now. So quite a bit was done through outreach on the website, through social media. We did a survey which was responded to by 857 people, and then of course our internal staff working group and our various committees for review. 857 surveys, most of those permanent residents, and a bit of a younger age demographic. A lot of business owners in there, and quite a bit of business owners that were interested in opening up their own cannabis business. And again, 78% in support of stores, as well as production, high proportion. Odor in public was an issue, but we addressed that through our clean air bylaw. Almost half are not concerned at all, which is a good sign. Where there was a common community concern that we buffer between businesses and facilities that cater to youth, and I'll go over that in a second, which we've done, and then also buffers between stores. So our recommendations as far as zones which would permit retail cannabis were those ones up on the screen. We chose those largely because they're located in the central business district and along the highway, and where we have concentrations of other commercial businesses. We did exclude a couple of zones that were islands within residential areas. I'm going to speak to some comments we have from the public in just a moment here on some of those zones. But we also included in that a 100-meter buffer from sites and facilities that are frequented by youth and children, so that includes schools, community centers, daycares, and the like. We also included a 100-meter buffer between cannabis stores in the downtown core business area, and a 300-meter buffer between stores in other areas. So that will go from property line to property line. So once the first store locates somewhere in town, the next nearest store will be 100 meters away, measured from the closest property line. And this is a map showing all of the buffers from sites catering to youth. So you can see in some locations that despite it's hard to see on the screen, but despite the fact that there's permissive zoning under that, one would not be able to open up a retail store in that location. Same with over here, and same with over here. This is a map of the 300-meter buffers outside of the central business district. So these are hypothetical store locations that we've chosen on the map here to just sort of show some of the options. As I said in the last presentation, we don't anticipate that we would get that many stores in town. The likelihood of getting one or two at this point is pretty good. The likelihood of more than that, it's good, but we don't see there being more than 5 or 6 realistically. And just on this map here, this shows possible locations. And again, this was just to demonstrate the absolute maximum concentration. We don't believe that the market would support this many, but these are showing the 100-meter spacing in the commercial area. We had 5 comments from the public regarding some concerns about the C2 zone. We've opted not to make any recommendations to council make changes here. The C2 zone is in the core commercial area, and that was the feedback from the public, that retail cannabis be allowed in the core commercial areas. Those zones that are currently zone C2 accommodate retail uses. That is consistent with the OCP. A lot of the C2 zone area includes residences, single-family residences. A lot of them are heritage houses, so they would be protected heritage properties. There's a number of large hurdles that property owners would have to overcome to put a business in one of these homes. That includes large-scale interior renovations. You'd have to reinforce the floor joists. You'd have to meet all the fire codes. You'd have to have separation of uses. You'd have to have special exits. It would be quite onerous. It's rather unlikely. The next big barrier to that is the fact that the province will not approve a cannabis retail location if the local government does not support it. So similar to how we approve liquor primary right now, these applications will come to council for consideration. You'll have the opportunity to consider that along with public notice. Right now for liquor, what we do is a 100-meter notice. When this comes back for final adoption, we will also bring an updated liquor policy, which we'll probably call the Liquor and Cannabis Public Notice Policy. And based on any feedback today, we can include special provisions in that, but my intent was to do it similar to liquor where we have a 100-meter notification. And that gives council the option to exclude locations where there may or may not be an issue. Moving ahead, just briefly on and I'll answer any questions about that after the presentation if you like. We allow cannabis production in the M1 and M2 zones, and a 15-meter setback from any property line of a residential site that might be next door to that. And then again, there was some provisions in the licensing bylaws surrounding odor that we addressed.
And now we have a question from Councillor Nixon.
Daniel, just when it comes back from Victoria to the sitting council of the day,
Yeah.
then there would be a public hearing again for the public to have a say that, or within that 100-meter call out.
It wouldn't be a public hearing. What we do currently is
Notice?
is a public notice, and then we present that feedback to council.
Okay.
So just to add to that, it could be any form of public consultation that you see fit. So typically communities create a standard and stick with that, but it doesn't have to be a public hearing or public notice. It could be whatever form of consultation you see fit.
Okay. Okay,
I'm
thanks.
sorry, I didn't introduce Marin with Meraki Consulting, who's been doing a lot of work for us on this. So just to recap here where we are, again, today public hearing, and council has the option to grant third reading, and then we move forward. We're currently on a timeline that we can have final adoption in advance of federal legalization. If council chooses to make any changes today, then that would change that date, but that can be done, and we move forward from there. Which is right there on the screen.
Any questions? I just want to go back and go over one more time about if people wanted to put a cannabis store into a residential C2 zone, and let's just say that they were prepared to do all of those requirements that we have, which do seem quite onerous to me. Can council of the day just say, no, we just don't think that this is the right place? It's, even though it's a C2 zone and it's within 100 meters of another, or from a park or wherever else, but council of the day can just say, no, we don't think this is the right location for this.
That's correct. Assuming it's outside of the 100 meters and it was allowed otherwise, it wouldn't even come to that discussion if it was within the 100-meter buffer of another store, or if it was within the 100-meter buffer of, say, the community center, then it would just be a full stop at the front counter. But in a case where we had a store come in and it was in our house, we would send it out for notification right off the bat. That would be our process, similar to liquor. And we can have conversations with the applicant prior to coming to council and say, hey, this doesn't appear to be a good location. If that applicant chose to want to continue, then we would put it in front of council, make a recommendation based on that process thus far, and then it would be council's discretion to say no. And if that was the case, then the province will not approve that location.
Councilor Nixon.
So Daniel, we're not doing any less or any more in a beer and wine store with this approach.
In what sense?
Well, just that it would go to Victoria first, and then it would come in to you, and then it would come to the council.
Yes, if it's the same as liquor, they make their application to the province, and then they come to us with that application in hand and make a similar application here, and then we move forward. It's very, very, very similar.
It would seem to me that it would be prudent for somebody to come and talk to the city, say, here's what I'm thinking about, to find out if it's a no-fly zone or if it's a possibility, then to save themselves all the expense and the grief of going through the process. And I would assume that we would promote that as an avenue that people should be looking into.
We offer everyone the option for what I call a pre-application meeting. There's no charge for it. We sit down for a half hour, an hour, and go over it. This would be no different.
Councilor Lando.
Yeah, so following on that one, the majority of the feedback that we received, there was actually not a lot. I was quite surprised, but not a lot of feedback. But the majority of the feedback was focusing on the C2 zoning issue, and sort of the message that we're hearing is that it seems unlikely. You've got all these odious restrictions, and you do have to do the 100-meter notification with adjoining neighbors, and ultimately the decision of the council at the day is a deciding factor when after the referral comes from what is the acronym for the new cannabis organization? I can't remember whatever they're called.
LCRB, something like that?
Yeah, LCRB. So what I'm hearing is that, given, the expression that we've seen from the neighbors, there would be it would be very unlikely that would fly. But on the other side, looking at the other options, so seeing the feedback, and if council had decided that wanted to make a change at this point and specifically exclude C2, and this is the question I need a bit more background on, is obviously there's some C2 right around the downtown core, like on the other side of 3rd, on Mackenzie on the other side of 3rd. If we were to go to some sort of a revision of the existing bylaw that would prohibit C2 zoning or certain areas within C2, the key thing is that would delay the process. We'd have to go back a couple steps, and we're looking at a couple more months of going through the process a few more times. The other question I had is, what about I'm foggy on the totality of C2 zoning. Would that have other impacts on other C2 zones?
We did an inventory, and it's mixed in terms of which are residences and which are commercial. The only C2 is in the downtown core area, and it sort of perimeters the C1 zone. So you've got down along 3rd here, or sorry, 2nd, they extend up Mackenzie Avenue, and then down 2nd again on this side. So there's a mixture of residences and commercial buildings, and then some vacant lots. If I remember, it was 17 vacant lots, 8 or 10 commercial buildings, and then 15-ish houses.
And there likely are more viable C2 zone ones, like further down, like First or Second Street west, and if we were to make specific prohibitions to C2, it would be a blanket for all of C2 zoning. So to specifically say, so that's sort of the predicament we're in, is that we could, take a couple more months, ban all C2, but then you might hear the other side of the argument is that this is more of a commercial and appropriate neighborhood. So to me, it seems like in the decision that I'm making today, it's like, are we going to go with common sense that, it's probably not going to be okay, but we don't know because that's up to a future council? Or do we re-engage and take a step back and go for the full exclusion of C2? So is that more or less?
Yeah, I mean, you have the option to drop C2 out right now. It can't be done after the public hearing. It has to be done before. That's going to impact a lot
Well,
of...
it can be, but with another public hearing.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
It sounded very final the way you said it. I don't want to tell you planning types what to do.
But right now, we only have one rezoning bylaw on the table. So that bylaw, it would be pointless to entertain a public hearing for that bylaw if you were going to change it afterwards. If you changed it before, then you could. I also wanted to just emphasize too that we're mirroring the OCP land use designation here, which is a mixed use commercial. I also wanted to mention that it would not be feasible for someone to operate a cannabis retail store within their home. Like this is there's classes in the BC Building Code that require fire separation, so it's not a home occupation. This would be a retail use, so there'd be extensive renovations required to the inside of the building. So I mean, I think the only building that we have that is formerly a home and now a business in this area is the Main Street Cafe, and they've used the whole building as a business. They don't have a separation there, as far as I'm aware. So.
Okay. Was you covered your question? Or?
Yeah, Your Worship, I think another thing that's important to point out is that when Daniel does rewrite the cannabis policy, that in that policy, he's going to refer to residential homes as not being supported for use for retail sale of cannabis. So it will be a city policy.
Okay.
It's another protection.
All right. Anybody got any other questions before I open up this public hearing? I'm going to call this public hearing to order. This public hearing is being convened pursuant to Section 464 of the Local Government Act. At this public hearing, the public will be allowed to make representations to council, and all persons present who believe their interests are affected by the proposed bylaw shall be given the opportunity to address council or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Those of you who wish to speak concerning this proposed bylaw should commence your address to council by clearly stating your name and address. Then you may give us the benefit of your views concerning the proposed bylaw. We have a speakers list and a few names are on here. I will be going out to the public a minimum of 3 times to see if there are any other members of the public that wish to speak to this bylaw. And before I start, I want to ask the corporate officer to confirm that all due process was followed according to the Local Government Act.
Yes, Your Worship, all due process was followed for zoning amendment bylaw number 2236. We did receive 5 public comments and Mr. Sturgeon discussed them.
So I do have 2 names on the speakers list in this zoning amendment bylaw 2236 cannabis regulations is open, and the first speaker is Mr. Bruce Allen.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. I'd like to speak to this issue. We wrote a request that you remove the C2 downtown fringe area from your bylaw. The downtown fringe area is, the definition is this district provides for the establishment of compatible commercial and residential uses in areas of transition between the central commercial district and residential districts. This is things like lawyers' offices, as defined, lawyers' offices, beauty shops, things like this, clubs. It is not the downtown core. And this is a problem, one of the concerns I had about the survey that was done online. the question was downtown core, and you got a lot of people going, yeah. But when people think about the downtown core, they don't think about Mackenzie Avenue, where the residents are. And that's where we are. What's happened in this area is there has been a slow, we feel almost assault on the area, between bed and breakfasts, between Airbnbs, and now we're going to have cannabis shops. If you people know, Mackenzie Avenue is one of the primary streets in Revelstoke. The tourists love it. They walk down that street with their cameras and they click, and I see hundreds of them, literally. People come to this town and they love this town. Oh, the downtown's so beautiful, it's heritage. Oh, the neighborhoods next door are beautiful, they're all heritage. That street's just gorgeous, it's picturesque. And now we're going to allow cannabis stores on it. There's a couple of things that happen. First of all, like I said, it's a beautiful street, and we want to keep it that way. It's an asset to the community. It's the route between the high school and the downtown. All the kids tramp down Mackenzie Avenue on their way to get lunch. Now, we have this big concern about exposing our youth to cannabis stores, but we're going to put them right on the route where they walk back and forth from school to the restaurants. It seems as if, no slight from the consultants, but someone didn't ground truth this report. This is not a place to put cannabis stores. The other thing this does is it reduces the housing supply. Now you can say, oh, it's going to be difficult to put one in, but where there's a will, there's a way. And if you've zoned this to be for commercial, to cannabis shops, and that's exactly what your bylaw is going to say, it's going to include in there cannabis shops. Oh boy, look, we can put them there. It's like advertising it. So I want you to please seriously think about what you're doing here. It's a beautiful asset to the community, this street. Connaught's another one where you walk down it to get to the rec center. And all the other points I've made. You could throw a rock, if you had a good arm, maybe Mark's got one,
I don't.
from my house and hit the parking lot of the community center, where all the kids go for every activity in town. So please, seriously think about what you're doing here. Let's not destroy the neighborhood a little more. Let's try and be sensitive to the people that are living there, because this is primarily, it's residential. You excluded all, there's all the C2 zones, or C zones. You excluded 9 because they are next to residential neighborhoods. You included 7. One of them being one that's totally residential. That's what I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. Steve Cross, your name is next on the list, sir.
Yes, thank you. Mayor and councillors, thank you for the opportunity. Bruce, some good comments. Made me think, that's for sure. I just wanted to make a simple comment about the Williamson Lake campground situation with the cannabis. I think at second reading, Mayor, you made the comment that maybe we should include that in parkland as being excluded. I think all public parks are excluded, and I'm just concerned about, it's kind of the swimming hole for the neighborhood, a lot of families there, and the people that are camping there, it's quite dense, and I think there could be a lot of issues and a lot of denigration of the experience for people there that aren't cannabis users. So I'd like to see that included as public parkland and excluded from any cannabis use, since it's within the city limits.
Okay, thank you. And just for your information, what we're talking about here is for retail sales, and that would be excluded, but I still agree and stand by what I said earlier, is that somewhere in parks or our policies that it shouldn't be allowed to be consumed at those places, but it's not being considered as retail sales, which what we're talking about here. Those were the speakers that I had on my list. The floor is open if anyone from the public wishes to speak to this zoning bylaw for cannabis regulation. Looking for any comments from the public for a second time? Third and final time, any comments from the public on this cannabis regulation bylaw? Looking for a motion to close the public hearing. Councillor Nixon, seconded by Councillor Orlando. All those in favor? Motion is carried.
I can bring forward our next motion, Your Worship. The zoning amendment bylaw 2236 be read a third time.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Nixon. And discussion on the motion. Councillor Nixon?
Your Worship, I think we're going to pass on the torch to the next council, and they're going to use the same prudent regulatory view of anybody coming forward and where they would like to place a store. And they'll be using the same sort of regulatory vision that we used when we had beer and wine stores come forward to this table. And I think I trust the next council to do a prudent job on that.
Well, looking at some of the comments that we received today, I agree, and I'm concerned about the retail sales in the residential zones. And I guess the first question I have for the staff is that this 100-meter buffer from the school parking lot, from the community center, what does that do in relation to Mackenzie Avenue? Is it go far enough to exclude most of that? And I guess because the reason why I'm bringing it up is that one of the things we have to be concerned about is what is going to happen to the downtown core, and the C2 zones are going to be more and more important because that's where the expansion that I can see of the downtown retail and the business sector. I am not in favor of cannabis being in residential zones and residential houses, and I would even go as far as to, after this is dealt with, to ask council for a motion that we make sure that these are recommendations going into the policy, the city's policy for regulating it, keeping it out of this bylaw, but making sure that there are strong statements of where we want it. So the first question is the Mackenzie Avenue in relation to the school and the community center, and how much does that impact Mackenzie Avenue?
The map's on the screen behind you right now. You can see the yellow area, which is Centennial Park and the community center. So right in almost the center of the map there, that captures the 400 block of Mackenzie Avenue on the north side. Is that better?
That's the 500 block.
Pardon me.
Okay. So if you...
And some of these lots in here too.
Okay. So right now, if we had in our policy about the residential, that would allow Mackenzie up to 3rd Street.
Yes, we could include in the policy that making a policy on the fly, that council not support cannabis sales in existing single-family homes that exist at the time of. I'll need to fact check that, but.
Well, and I think that it's important for us to take that extra step. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and I'm looking for comments from council. Questions? Councillor Orlando.
Yeah, Your Worship. Just sort of more of a general comment. We've been through an extensive process here. Right now, the discussion is focused primarily on between Mackenzie and Orton on 3rd, and then just past 3rd on Mackenzie Avenue for the parts that aren't excluded by other exclusions. But to bring it back and just look at the overall process, I just have a feeling that it went really well. When I sat down to read Mr. Sturgeon's report, before I put some pre-reading thoughts in my head, what do I think it's going to say, what do I think the feedback from people is going to be, what seems to make sense, given the fact that we have federal change and we need to adapt to it. And I think a lot of those things in my mind more or less align. People are concerned about youth having access, that's a big thing for them. if they don't smoke or don't want to smell the smoke, they just don't want to have it in their in their vicinity, and that's something that's dealt with. And then especially, I guess, the commercial regulatory approach. I was concerned that if we had an overly restrictive bylaw, it would in effect limit it to, for example, like the liquor stores where you have a 1 kilometer exclusion zone around existing ones, and you'd end up with it, not really having a competitive marketplace just because, only 2 people got in and then you're stuck with them forever. This, I think, the 100-meter zone and the 300-meter zone in the respective areas allow for people to try and run a good business, and I think I'm supportive of it in general. With regards to the particular question at hand today about the C2 zones, I think there's balancing the C2 zones in that area versus other areas, but it sounds to me like policy statements that have already been considered for inclusion in there would likely preclude somebody from going through the investment and expense of putting something in that neighborhood. So I am, I guess I would say, generally happy about this. And then another thing that I would like to point out is I feel that in terms of the commercial regulation, that's sort of a harder fix thing that we're doing today, but the clean air aspect of it is something that can be adjusted much more easily. So something like comments regarding Williamson's Lake campgrounds or various other places, those things can be done through a not as difficult process as the actual zoning regulation. It can be the next council say, hey, we got a problem in Grizzly Plaza, people are smoking too much in there, we're going to make a change, and that can be something that can be done just to adjust to a big societal change that we're seeing. And none of us have a crystal ball. We don't really know how this is going to turn out and play out, but those options will be fairly easy for future councils to address.
Councilor Brothers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that this council for sure understands that the downtown core and Mackenzie Avenue is sacred to this town in the sense that it's iconic and it's very, very important. I suspect that future councils are going to feel the same way. And I'm convinced that I've been persuaded at least that there are going to be some protections in there to make sure that we're not going to find some cannabis stores in areas in C2 that council of the day and the public does not want to see. So I feel comforted by that. I hope that if we do vote in that way, that the public will also see that there is a comfort level there, and so I will be in favor of moving forward with this on the understanding that there are strict policy guidelines that are put in there to protect those C2 areas.
So the motion on the floor is to approve this in third reading. Is there any more discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. I think, yes. You know what I'm thinking already. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that policy that goes along with this bylaw is strong, to word that the non-support would be there for anybody considering putting cannabis retail into a residential home.
And that's your motion? So basically it's Excel. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sells. So basically what we're saying is that we're recommending a policy that no cannabis sales are in single-family residential homes. Period. Any other discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Bring forward our next motion, which is the development variance permit DVP 2018-05 be approved for issuance.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Sells. Discussion? I'm looking for public comment on the zoning business license. Councillor Lemon.
Yes, this is a relatively minor development variance permit for, I think it's was about 2.5 foot extension to allow for a 409 square foot addition to a home, and the staff report was supportive of it for a number of reasons.
Is there any other comments or questions on the motion? Yes, Mr. Sturgeon.
Your Worship, we normally let council know when we have comments from the public. We received one comment on this application from one of the adjacent neighbors. They had some concerns about fire separations, and that will be addressed through the building permit process.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Next item I have on the agenda is the Business License Amendment Bylaw 2237, and this has the addition of the cannabis regulations.
Yeah. For
And-
production facility and retail sales.
And it's on this agenda right now to see if there's any public comments on the Business License Amendment Bylaw 2237.
Your worship, are we receiving this or information or pass?
We're just looking for comments from the public.
That's correct. Okay, thank you.
This Business License Amendment Bylaw has to do with the addition of cannabis regulations. No comments from the public? Only one quick announcement for me is that this is our first council meeting since the Luna Fest, and I just wanted to congratulate all of the organizers and participants, and of course all the people that came out and enjoyed the evening. It was a great event, and I think it would be nice and appropriate if council made a motion to send a letter of congratulations and appreciation to the Luna Fest committee. Councillor Duke and Councillor Sauls. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. We have one delegation today, and it's the Revelstoke Arts Council. Margot, you're doing the presentation? I am. Beautiful.
So I'm not presenting on Luna today, but it was wonderful. I'm reporting on the Summer Street Fest from 2018. So we saw another good year at Street Fest. This year we actually had a 45% increase in attendance, bringing it up, estimated from the surveys we do to nearly 29,000 people, over 20,000 last year. So obviously the event has continued to grow and continue to get more popular and be of great value to the city and to the community. We are mainly city funded. That is how we are able to put that on, with 10% coming from the RAA and a small amount from the government as well of Canada. So we put on 66 nights of live music with 69 different artists performing this year. Some of you may know or may not know that Street Fest in some version has been running since 1990, so it's been going on for a very long time and has become an integral part of the community. And it's an event that appeals to young, old, locals, tourists, families, and everyone in between, so it offers a lot of value. So you can see here some photos from one of our big nights this year, which was the Paper Boys, which are a 8 or 9 piece band. And as you can see here, we had a huge crowd and lots of community involvement, lots of dancing, lots of kids, and yeah. So over the past few years, we've really worked on increasing the quality of the bands, bringing a different band each night, and we've received really good feedback on this. I've received a lot of comments this year on just how good the quality of performers is, and that continues to bring more tourists into town. We have maintained a lot of online information about the bands playing and increased our social media presence around it. And through grant money we actually got through the Columbia Basin Trust, we've been able to upgrade a lot of our tech equipment, so sound and lighting equipment, and we've been able to use that at Street Fest to improve the experience for everyone there too. So we run a survey every year and try and just get some feedback from the people there. So like I said, 28,886 is our estimate of how many people attended this year. The average attendance each night was 473 people, with average peak of 201 and maximum peak of 340 people. We've got 18 different countries that people have let us know they've come from, and 85% of visitors have said that the festival's more likely to make them return or extend their stay in Revelstoke. And I think that's been one of the goals, is to transition that summer tourism from one night only to get people to stay a little longer in the community, to spend money in hotels and restaurants and contribute to the economy that way. So I've got some comments here from some feedback that we have received. I won't read all of them out to you, but you can see that it's a really unique event. People coming, there's someone from Calgary saying that they wish they had something like this there, or there's other towns that do one night a week or sporadic live music, but it's every night, and it offers tourists and locals something to get them out of their houses, and something that's really accessible to everyone in the community and all different age groups there. So over the past 10 years, like I said, we've managed to improve the quality of the bands and the sound equipment. This year we were able to get some of the local businesses on board to provide food vouchers, so we're able to start feeding some of the touring bands. It's challenging to maintain this quality. The thing that hasn't changed over the last 10 years is how much we're paying the bands. So they haven't really seen a raise in money, and over the whole arts industry, it's been pretty stagnant for performers' wages. So, you know, this is making it harder to get bands to come, because the cost of travel, the cost of accommodation, it's continually increasing, yet they're not seeing that revenue coming back in their performance fees. So to be able to maintain this quality and continue to provide this event to the community, we're asking for an increase in our operating grant of $5,000, so we can continue to deliver this cultural service to the community. And just in closing, I just pulled some information out of the City of Revelstoke's Park, Recreation and Culture Master Plan from 2011. And this was some research done that suggests in BC it's become recognised that arts and culture are significant contributors to the quality of life, making our communities healthier, more vibrant, and enhancing young people's ability to learn, which I found pretty interesting information. And the presence of a thriving art and cultural sector in a community is essential to attracting and retaining the highly trained creative workforce needed to compete in the 21st century global economy. And, you know, we've seen that in our town as places like the CoLab are bringing in more highly skilled people into the community, and having a thriving arts culture actually helps us to maintain that. And that cultural tourism is the fastest growing part of the industry, and one that's getting more attention as we move forward. So I think the event itself really diversifies our tourism base. We know that many people come to Revelstoke to ski or to bike or to take part in the outdoors, but providing that different experience, so people who aren't interested in that have something they can embrace too, I think offers real value to the community.
Okay, thanks, Margot. Questions? Councillor Brothers.
A comment. First of all, I mean, what you explained of how important it is for communities. Sitting at this table for 4 years, I'm sure all of the other councillors and the mayor would say the same thing. It has really been an eye-opener to see how important the arts is necessary for this community, and how the good things it does for the young, for the old, and also bringing in the tourists. I mean, I applaud all of the work you've done, and you've worked really, really hard, at least for the 4 years that we've seen. One question, is there any way that we can measure how much, in particular this thing, brings into the community dollar-wise? Is it, you know, just to show the public that this is all worthwhile, not only from a cultural point of view, but it does wonders for our community?
It looks like Carol would like to answer this. I do have something to say.
I wasn't going to let her speak because you're at the podium.
The accepted economic generator is for every dollar you spend, you get 4. That's cultural tourism is a 4-to-1 investment, $4 return on a dollar investment. So if the city puts 50 in, you're generating $250,000 worth of economic activity.
And I mean, I reached out to a few downtown business owners trying to get a quote from them to put in this, and people are very busy. But I did chat with Joel Asher of Chubby Funsters, and just to get his perspective on what it does from a business perspective. And he couldn't say enough good things about it for the aliveness that creates in the downtown, for keeping people out past the 7, 8 p.m. dinner time, for getting kids out later at night, families, whether they're eating an ice cream or it's just creating that energy downtown, which is spilling over into businesses. So, yeah, Carol's got the figure number for you, but finding a way to really convey that to the public is probably a worthwhile thing to look into for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, you actually, hit a little bit of a soft spot with me, since you're talking about 1990, and I'm thinking, oh God, that was the first year I was elected, sat at this table, was 1990, and when we worked on the revitalization and the Grizzly Plaza and the whole downtown core, that was the vision, and to see what it's evolved into over the years, it's doing exactly what we wanted it to do, and it delivers year after year, and it's because of the great programming and the volunteers that keep it running. So thank you to all the work that you guys do, and it's appreciated by more than just the people that visit there every night, because we all reap those benefits. So thank you. We are on 9A. Anybody would like to do that?
Bring it forward, Your Worship. The pesticide use amendment bylaw number 2121 be read a first, second, and third time.
Motion by Councillor Brothers, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Discussion. Councillor Nixon.
This is to bring the amendment to the pesticide bylaw up to today's reality. There was very good work done on it in 2010, 2011, and that's before the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society came about. So this is just to bring us into the reality of invasive species and dealing with them.
Thank you. Comments or questions from council? All those in favor? Motion's carried. And we are going into development services. We have a presentation for 411. Oh, sorry, 9B. Sorry.
Your Worship, I'll bring forward that the 2019 property tax exemption bylaw number 2235 be adopted.
Motion by Councillor Nixon, seconded by Councillor Brothers. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Now, Mr. Sturgeon, we have a, yes.
Just, I don't know if this is the time to put it forward for the next council to put in the budgetary process for a $5,000 increase to, we kind of missed that. They had a $5,000 ask for the street festival. For a budgetary increase.
Wouldn't that be automatically brought forward through economic development for budget discussions?
Okay, that's fine. Just want to make sure it's not missed.
If you want to get your name on the minutes and you want to have that in there, you're free to put any motion you want on the floor.
My name's in enough places. I don't care. Just want to make sure it's not been missed.
Just want to make sure you're looked after.
In front of you today is a development permit application for 411 First Street West. The site is in the center of the drawing there, not showing up very well right there. Just northwest of Mackenzie Avenue by a couple of blocks.
Across the street from TD Bank.
Correct. OCP designation is T5, and our zoning, which is mixed use urban center, and our zoning is C1. Across the street from TD Bank and Emos and Blue Yoga. To the right of it on that map is Excel Tire, and to the left or northwest is a provincial,
Actually, it's Family Laundry.
yes, sorry, Family Laundry and Excel. And the provincial parking lot for one of their ministries is located on the corner of Rockaby and First. It's a proposal for a 3-story mixed-use building with commercial on the ground floor and apartments on the 2nd and 3rd floor. There would be separate entrances for those 2 uses. One accessing right off the street into this glazed area here for the commercial, and the second unit would be up a set of stairs with an internal stairwell. 750 square feet of commercial space, and the apartments are about 1,200 each with 2 bedrooms. Just zooming in on this exact drawing right now to a site plan right there. 0 lot line setbacks on both sides, that's consistent with the zone, and just over 2 meters from the front to the closest part of the building, and 5 meters at the back to the closest part of the building. And then at the back, there is enclosed parking underneath. Currently, the zoning bylaw requires 1.5 stalls per residential unit. They're providing 2 per unit. And the clause in the zoning bylaw that excludes the requirement for parking would apply in this case, because I'm quoting, "It is a use that does not require more parking or loading." So currently, retail uses are permitted. There is more than 750 square feet of commercial space on the site, although it's not being used. And so we are not changing the use, we're not changing the size of commercial square footage, and therefore the requirement for parking is waived. That's in the zoning bylaw. There's some floor plans that are in your package there showing the 2 units. This is in the downtown revitalization development permit area. I quoted the guidelines in my report that said that a new development should be sympathetic to the scale, mass, materials, and colors in existing heritage buildings. It's a difficult clause to go with. What is heritage in the downtown core? We don't have a good description of that. We've got the laundry to the one side, which is, if I had to describe it, brutalistic architecture. And to the right, we've got some older single-family homes. So this is a new form of architecture. It's similar to the bike shop and an office space that we saw introduced farther down the street on First. Across the street, we've got some probably 70s or 80s era blocky commercial construction. So we're seeing an introduction of more modern architecture into town right now. We've worked with the applicant on this to adjust some siding, but we haven't done anything to adjust the look of the building itself. One thing that we did go back and forth on was height and setbacks. The maximum height in the zone is 12 meters. I'll fast forward here to that one, this one. They're currently at just over 10, and the building tapers down towards the house, which this would be to the north, and this would be the laundry right here. So they're tapering down on this side. So it is higher overall, but sympathetic in the sense that the lower side is closer to that house. We've moved the building farther forward on the lot to address the impact on the neighboring property at the rear, which is right here. This is a difficult scenario where you've got 0 lot line setbacks, and this is a permitted use and a permitted form in the zone. We don't have options to restrict them more than this. They are going to try to maximize their floor space in this building to make it economically feasible. They've introduced some windows up here to add some transparency to the wall, as well as down here. And there's a 3D rendering of the streetscape once this would be complete. So I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
But isn't looking at the colors on here, is that the colors that are going to be in the building? Because the drawings and what I've seen shows it as being quite black.
It's a painted gray. I can look through my report, and I'll also offer that the consultant is here who might be able to comment. That's Adam. But there's a metal trim, which is a dark gray, and then the panels on the side are, I can't remember the exact name of it. But that rendering there, as far as I'm concerned is fairly accurate of what we're expecting to see.
Councillor Souls.
Your Worship, Mr. Sturgeon, with the house beside it on the side, what's being done for snow mitigation between the buildings?
Nothing at this point.
I wouldn't think that the snow would slide off of that,
I'm thinking off the house.
off the house.
For this building, we would expect snow stops on the roof, if that was something that was desired. To best of my knowledge, it's not a building code requirement.
What about the snow coming off the other house?
Yeah, now on the other side, you're worried about shedding from here down the side.
Yep. In between the two.
That would happen. We can look into that. I apologize, it wasn't raised during our referral process with we sent it out to our building official for comment. So I can look into that.
Appreciate that.
I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to wait till we get a motion on the floor.
I can bring a motion for Your Worship. The application for DP 2018-08 be accepted.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion is carried.
The final issuance of DP 2018-08 be subject to the following. Receipt of financial security in the amount of $3,042 for landscaping works as specified in the draft development permit.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Souls. Any comments or questions? I have a few comments that I would like to make, and even though I like this building and I think it's going to be a nice addition to the streetscape, I am concerned with the Heritage Downtown Core. And it's funny that today, at this council meeting today, we had a presentation at the public hearing, and it talked about how people react to walking up and down Mackenzie Avenue and seeing the buildings and the streetscaping, and how it's very attractive, and that's what people like. Councillor Brothers actually made a comment about the downtown core being sacred. And in the presentation for Street Fest, one of the comments from the public was, the city keeps getting cuter every time I visit. So my point is that 3 comments just in the last 30 minutes on the downtown core, and I know that I'm a broken record when it comes to talking about Revite in the downtown core, but I can tell you is that I like the building. I am concerned with the cumulative impact of changing, and we could call this a sympathetic development, but I don't call it a sympathetic development. And especially you made the reference, Mr. Sturgeon, to less than a block down the street is the new bike shop, which has very similar design elements to it, and that's why I asked about the color, because I'm just concerned that we are straying too far from what is appreciated in the community, and I've had conversations over the last few years about some things that are going on, and I guess it boils down to the comments I keep hearing are our design guidelines aren't strong enough, they're not up to date, and it really makes me question, how did we over the years redo the whole downtown with streetscaping and buildings and facades and everything else, and yet the design guidelines are the same that's been there for years. So we've been, I think, extremely successful in protecting and enhancing the downtown core, and I am worried that if we keep chipping away and not looking at development that is adding to the revitalization, I'm just worried that we are going to start losing the things that we've become famous for. And I hate to be picking on this one here, because I actually do like the building. I would like it better if it was a block or 2 off of First Street. And I don't know what the process is, what staff, what they need, but if, we're going to have a bigger issue, and, there's lots of, there's infill development that's going, which this is, and the one down the street. There's other buildings that need more work done, and what are they going to become? And I think that's it's the thin edge of the wedge is what worries me, that we're going to start changing things, and all of a sudden, we're going to lose the ambiance and the reason why people are coming and spending time in Grizzly Plaza for the music and everything else. So that's what I'm concerned about. Councillor Dick.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what the mayor has to say, and I think it's good that there's a couple of people that are running for councillor in the audience right now, because that's one of the major things that we've come across in the last 6 months. Definitely, Mr. Sturgeon, yourself, I know you've even mentioned it, that the town does not have proper design guidelines. And it's the development in Revelstoke historically seems to have been a local phenomenon. So people that live here are the ones that are doing the development or the upgrading. And now you're seeing there's forces from external to Revelstoke that are coming in and bringing their design stylings to the community. But I strongly agree with your sentiments, Your Worship, that you will lose the downtown feel one lot at a time. And you just got to be very careful, and I think it's incumbent on the new council to set that as a priority in their early part of their term, to set some new guidelines, or at least work with the community and the OCD and whatever, get those guidelines into our bylaws.
Okay. Motion's on the floor. Councillor Orlando.
Just again, following on Councillor Duke's statement, putting aesthetic preferences into words can be complicated, very complicated. In terms of the pathway towards what I hear Councillor Duke and His Worship McKee asking for is some sort of a system and process for this. And just sorry to jump in on this particular application for this one. What sort of things need to be done to get there, in your opinion, Mr. Sturgeon?
It's my understanding that when the OCP was adopted, that there was another bylaw that was going to go with it that had what was called form-based guidelines, and that didn't happen. There's commonly accepted architectural terms that you can build in, and then you can combine those with graphical illustrations. I don't think that our design guidelines anticipated mono-pitch roofs. I mean, they were in style in the 60s, and now they're back again. And so, you can specify in guidelines that we want to see gable ends, we want to see steep pitched roofs, we want to see building articulation, we want to see these types of materials, we want to see neoclassical heritage, right? And then have a photo that accompanies that, and then delineate that within particular areas. And we have some very large DP areas right now. In the downtown Revite one is quite large, and then it transitions immediately to the residential areas. But our zoning is intended to sort of taper down to a certain degree within those areas, and that's not acknowledged in the design guidelines. I believe that when these were put in place that we were anticipating more rapid growth than we have seen, and we haven't seen that. And so now we're playing catch up. But it's clear and specific language in terms of architecture. Consultants or landowners will read our design guidelines in advance, invest money in design and planning, and then come to the city. At that point, they've already spent thousands of dollars on consultants, and for us to push back and say, well, we don't like that, and it's not written down, it makes it very difficult for them. So,
and I guess that's the
language.
And that's the frustrating part with today, is that there's been a whole bunch of process and meetings and a whole bunch of money being spent to come here, and then and I'm only speaking for myself that I'm not 110% happy with it. And that's unfortunate, because it shouldn't go this far, and we have to change our process so that people understand it right from the very start. And I was intimately involved with the whole Revite project right from the very start, and I used to walk people up and down and saying, is your project going to enhance what we already have? Because that's what we want. And when you start walking up and down the street and you're looking at what's been done, I think that people, they understand it and they get it. But to go through a process and then when it comes to this table, to be told that, well, you know what, we're not ecstatic, and that's unfortunate. So I guess the recommendation that I would like to be seeing is that staff go out and get these guidelines strengthened so that when development's coming in, they understand full well what we see as what we want to see especially in the downtown. I call it the specified area because that's what it used to be called. Councilor Brothers.
Thank you, Your Worship, for bringing that issue up, because I think it's a really important issue. And we've been asked in the last little while, what are the issues this council thinks are really important? And I think one of the most important issues for the next council is growth challenges. I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have that will the next council will encounter. We are growing really quickly. We who live here and who have lived here a certain period of time know who we are and what we want for this city, but it's not written down anywhere. And the difficulty now is if we don't write down who we are and what we want to be now, then we will have external forces coming in and telling us what's going to happen to this town, and so that's really important. That's why the OCP is so important, and also having these types of bylaws and thinking about them, thinking them through, so that we are prepared for the growth. So thank you for raising that.
So let's moving back to this motion. Is there any discussion on this motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. I think it would be appropriate to have a motion to refer to the next, or to staff, or strategic planning, or budget discussions about strengthening design guidelines for the downtown core specified area.
I'll bring forward a motion to that effect, Your Worship, that we ask staff to...
Are you okay with that, Cindy? Okay. We have a motion by Councillor Brothers, seconded by Councillor Sauls. Discussion on the motion. And it's anybody that works in retail, motel, hotel, restaurant that are meeting the public day to day, all day. I think that they understand exactly what I'm saying, because they're in direct discussions with the traveling public, and the public comes in and. If it's 99 out of 100 or more that are just saying how much they appreciate the town and how much they enjoy it, and I think it's really important that we protect that. Anyway, is there any more discussion on this motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sturgeon. Where the heck are we?
11B. Another presentation.
Okay. Yes.
Your Worship, yeah, I know I checked earlier today, but I'm having a bit of uncertainty right now, so I'm just, to be on the safe side, going to recuse myself for this one here. I did some checking, but I'm actually not 100% too sure, so I'm going to step out.
Okay, Mr. Sturgeon, you have a presentation?
This is a referral that we've received from the CSRD for a rezoning application on the Trans-Canada Highway that's just west of town. They've provided us with this nice map which shows our municipal boundary right here. And the subject property is right here with a zoom in over here. So this is the Boulder Mountain Resort as you're coming in to town on the right-hand side. It's changed ownership and they're expanding their operation there and adding a few campsites. I believe it may already be operating. And I don't have the background on the conversations that have occurred there. But in terms of land use, our department doesn't have any fundamental objection to it. It's a tourist accommodation use, which is good for this town. They're adding a couple of park model mobile homes, which required a minor tweaking to their language and their zoning bylaw. For that, we've made referrals. This is within our service areas for fire and police, and their comments are reflected in your recommendations. The fire chief did do an inspection there and noticed a few things that were of concern, so we're suggesting that that be addressed before this is finalized. The RCMP are also asking for a SEPTED review, which is a crime prevention through environmental design, and that's just to ensure that walkways are lit at night and as many possibilities can be mitigated against crime. And we're also making a comment to the CSRD that they consider our water catchment area for the Big Eddy, because this the cumulative effects of growth at the fringes of the city will have a drawdown impact on the aquifer. So that's an engineering issue. We don't have all the details here on this one, and I don't believe that this particular application is going to be of great concern, but if we were in one day to see extensive growth at the fringe, then that would become an issue we need to address. So just put that on the radar for the time being.
Okay.
That's everything, Mr. Sturgeon?
That's it, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Duke.
That the referral from the Columbia Shuswap Regional District for zoning amendment Boulder Mountain Resort bylaw number 851-13 be received.
Motion by Councillor Duke, second by Councillor Nixon. Discussion, Councillor Brothers?
I just have a question. In there, it indicated that the tourist cabin definition was going to be amended so it included a park model, and I was just going to ask you what that meant.
Park model?
Yeah.
It's a type of RV, manufactured home that sits on a pad that, rolls in on wheels, take the wheels off, and but it's, I think it's narrower than like a regular cabin would be, because it has to drive down the road.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Is there any other definition of that you...
It's as best as I would have been able to offer.
Good. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you.
Part 2, that a response be provided to the CSRD indicating the city recommends approval of CSRD bylaw number 851-13 subject to the conditions highlighted in the package.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Mr. Sturgeon, will you let our councillor in, please? And you have a presentation.
I do not have a presentation on the just except to say that on page 2, under the title Building Permit Applications, in the second sentence, it should have said the number of new residential permits received in the first 3 quarters has exceeded the total for 2017.
Okay. Motion?
Yes, the Development Activity Report and Building Permit Activity 2018 third quarterly summary report be received for information.
Motion by Councillor Duke, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Discussion, Councillor Nixon.
Daniel, just thank you for bringing this forward. I see all the work that's gone into trying to keep your head above water, and just impressive stats.
It's a whole team behind that.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you for the good work, and great to see the activity report. Thank you. Item D.
I'll bring the next one forward, Your Worship. That the Vancouver Foundation grant application in support of Revelstoke Community Farming be approved, and that the $10,000 per year for 3 years, 2019 to 2021, from the Community Economic Development Department budget to support implementation of the projects identified in the Community Connections Vancouver Foundation grant application for Revelstoke Community Farming be allocated.
Boom.
Motion by Councillor Brothers, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Nixon.
Your Worship, this is ongoing work that started back in about 2013, 2014 on our food charter and our food strategy. And this group works closely with the local food initiative group, and they do great work. And there's great interest behind this whole groundswell of people want to feed people in this town. It's just, it's just a basic Maslow thing that this town is really good at. But they also know that we're very isolated when the roads are closed and stuff. So they're just kind of trying to work us towards some sustainability here in the valley again. So it's all good.
Very well put, and I want to say, I think I represent all the people that like to eat. Councillor Brothers.
I just want to echo what Councillor Nixon has said. Again, sitting at this table for the past 4 years, this is another initiative that has been really incredible, seeing it grow in the last 4 years and how much work has been put into it, so it's well worthwhile.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Councillor Sauls?
Your Worship, I'm going to recuse myself as one of my companies has a relationship with the ESS.
That's Aaron's side of the table.
Okay. Item 11E, I move that submission of an application for UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, Emergency Social Services Funding Stream for $22,500 be approved.
Motion by Councillor Orlando, second by Councillor Duke. Discussion on the motion. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Moving into correspondence, we have a letter from the Community Benefits Coalition of BC. Anybody want to take any action on that?
As you know, there's been recent major infrastructure announcements related to this, but unfortunately, based on the letter, I don't have a lot of background on what the benefit of fulfilling the request.
I don't have that.
Your Worship, we can look into it.
Any other comments or questions on this? Staff will look into it and get back to us.
Perfect, that's what I was going to say, yeah.
The infrastructure planning grant, a letter from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So what we received when we were at UBCM, $10,000 planning grant. So I'm assuming that we automatically send a letter of thank you. Okay. And into communications, does anybody want anything to bring anything up out of the business license summary of September? The check requisition summary for September? Bylaw compliance monthly summary. Advisory Planning Commission minutes of September 12th and September 20th.
Your Worship, if I could bring something up with
Councillor Souls?
September 12th, we received an email from a member of the community concerned about her comments. Everyone on council now has their updated comments, and I just wanted to bring that up so everyone has a chance to review that at some point.
I think everybody received that. Okay. Any other comments on that? Okay. Questions from media?
No.
Is there anybody else here from media? Looking for a motion pursuant to section 90.1 A and G Community Charter to move in camera. Councillor Sauls, Brothers, all in favor. Motion's carried. Take a 4-minute break, and then we'll be back.